I'm Ethan, 33, and I've always been the black sheep of my family. My sister, Ava, 28, has always been the golden child, spoiled, entitled, and favored by our parents in ways I couldn't understand growing up. We haven't spoken in years, and honestly, I'm fine with that. But recently, my family drama took a turn I could never have predicted. It all started with a phone call from the bank. They needed to verify my identity for a $150,000 loan. It caught me completely off guard because I hadn't applied for any loan, let alone such a massive one. My first thought was that this was some sort of scam, but as I spoke with the bank, the reality began to sink in. My own parents had taken out the loan using my name as a co-signer, without telling me. To make matters worse, the loan was to fund Ava's dream wedding, the same wedding I wasn't even invited to. I can't say I was shocked by the exclusion. Our relationship had been rocky for years, but this was an entirely new level of betrayal. After that call, I confronted my parents. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the bank had made a mistake, but deep down, I knew the truth. When I asked them about it, they didn't even bother denying it. My mom, Laura, 60, and my dad, Jim, 62, admitted that they had forged my signature to take out the loan. And the worst part? They didn't even seem remorseful. They said it was my duty as Ava's brother to help contribute to her big day. My parents justified their actions by saying they had no other choice. They couldn't afford Ava's extravagant wedding, and since she had begged them to cover the costs, they decided the best course of action was to take out the loan, using me as their financial scapegoat. "You have a good credit score, Ethan," they said, as if that somehow made it okay. "We didn't want to burden you with this, but it's your sister's wedding. You should be honored to help." Honored? That was their excuse for committing fraud? They were clearly more concerned with keeping Ava happy than with the consequences of their actions. And the kicker? They didn't even feel the need to ask me because they figured I would say no, given the state of my relationship with Ava. For as long as I can remember, Ava's been the center of their world. She wanted a destination wedding, a luxury venue, designer dresses, the works. I knew she and her fiancé Josh were doing fine financially. They both have good jobs and could have easily afforded a more reasonable wedding, but no, it had to be a spectacle. What infuriated me the most wasn't just that my parents forged my signature, it was their entitlement. They honestly believed that I would be fine with all of this because it was family. As if that word made everything acceptable. I wasn't fine with it. Not at all. I told them that what they had done was illegal, and I wasn't going to let it slide. At first, they tried to play the guilt card. My mom started crying, her usual go-to move when things didn't go her way. My dad took a different approach, lecturing me about family duty and how important it was for Ava to have her dream wedding. "Ethan, if you go through with this," my dad warned, "it'll reflect badly on the family. Your sister just got engaged, and you're going to ruin everything." That was when I realized how deep their delusion went. They didn't care about the crime they had committed. They only cared about how it would affect Ava's engagement and reputation. It was infuriating. I hung up the phone after telling them I was done with them. If they thought they could drag me into their mess without consequences, they were dead wrong. After that call, I contacted the bank again and asked for the loan terms. I needed to understand the full extent of what I had unknowingly been roped into. When I received the documents and read the terms, my anger only grew. The loan had to be paid back in 2 years, and if my parents defaulted on any payments, I would be the one responsible. That was the final straw. I had spent the last 6 months preparing to start my own business. I had been saving money, building connections, and working on a solid plan. My parents knew this. They knew how important it was to me, yet they still forged my name on a massive loan that could jeopardize everything I had worked for. Something inside me snapped. Not only was I going to sue them, but I was also going to make sure everyone knew what kind of people they were. I logged onto Facebook and found Josh's profile, Ava's fiancé. I typed out a message detailing everything, how my parents had forged my signature, taken out a loan in my name, and how they were willing to destroy my financial future just to fund Ava's wedding. I hit send. I didn't stop there. I also sent the message to Josh's parents and several people tagged in family photos. I wanted to make sure the news spread far and wide. If Ava had any idea about this, I was going to expose her too. If she didn't, well, she deserved to know the kind of mess she was marrying into. A few days later, the fallout began. My parents were hysterical. Ava had confronted them after Josh showed her the message I sent, and things exploded. My sister was furious, not at me, but at our parents. She had no idea they had taken out a loan for her wedding, let alone forged my signature to do it. She told them she wanted nothing to do with the money and that they needed to pay back every cent. As for me, my parents were calling, begging me to fix things, to apologize to Ava and Josh, to make it all go away. But I wasn't interested in their pleas. I had already made up my mind. I told them I was cutting them off for good, and I was moving forward with the lawsuit. What struck me was how easily my parents turned on Ava the moment she sided with me. They called her ungrateful and selfish, which I found ironic considering the lengths they had gone to in order to make her happy in the first place. Now, comma. I'm not going to lie, part of me enjoyed watching their world crumble. They had betrayed me in such a personal, gut-wrenching way that I couldn't help but feel a little satisfaction seeing it backfire. But I also felt conflicted. Ava reached out to me, furious that I had dragged her fiancé and his family into the mess. She claimed she had no idea what our parents had done and that if I had just talked to her, none of this would have happened. She was right about one thing. I had acted on my assumptions. But could you blame me? Given our history, it wasn't far-fetched to think she was in on it. Now I'm left wondering if I overstepped. Was I right to go straight to her fiancé? Should I have handled things differently? Part of me knows I did the right thing by exposing the truth. Another part of me wonders if I should have given Ava a chance to explain herself before blowing up her life. Either way, there's no turning back now. After sending those messages to Ava's fiancé and his family, the fallout was swift. Within a day, Ava confronted our parents, and it didn't take long for everything to come crashing down. The phone calls started early the next morning, first from my mom, then my dad, both trying to clean up the mess they had made. "Ethan, you didn't have to do this," my mom cried into the phone. Her voice was shaky, desperate. "You've ruined everything. Ava's wedding, our family. How could you?" I wasn't in the mood for her theatrics. "How could I? How could you forge my signature and put me on the hook for $150,000 without my knowledge? How could you not even have the decency to ask me first?" I could hear my dad in the background, telling her to calm down. But she wasn't calming down, she was spiraling. I imagined her sitting in the kitchen, gripping the phone, trying to control a situation she had absolutely no control over anymore. It wasn't my problem. "I'm not going to let this slide, Mom. What you and Dad did wasn't just wrong. It was illegal. You expect me to just roll over because Ava needs her princess wedding? It's not happening. I'm done." Silence hung on the other end. I think that's when it finally hit them that I wasn't going to back down. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I ended the call before they could plead any further. I was tired of hearing their excuses. Later that day, I got a message from Ava. I had expected her to be angry, and I wasn't wrong. She was furious, but not for the reasons I anticipated. "You had no right to drag Josh and his family into this," she texted. "I had no idea what Mom and Dad were up to, and now Josh is rethinking everything. You've ruined my wedding." I stared at the message for a few minutes, feeling that familiar wave of frustration rising. Ava's self-centeredness was nothing new. Of course, in her eyes, I was the bad guy. Never mind that our parents had committed fraud in my name, it was all about her wedding. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I thought back to the conversations I'd had with her over the years, the countless times she'd ignored me or treated me like an afterthought, the way she used our parents like a personal ATM, knowing they would give in to her every whim. Even now, it was all about her. Eventually, I replied, "I didn't know you were in the dark about the loan, but what Mom and Dad did was wrong and they dragged me into it. I had every right to protect myself. Maybe you didn't know, but your fiancé and his family deserved to know the truth. I didn't ruin anything. Mom and Dad did. I hit send, knowing it wouldn't make a difference. Ava was too deep in her own world to see the bigger picture. To her, I was just the problem, the obstacle standing between her and her dream wedding. Over the next few days, the tension only escalated. My parents continued to call, trying to guilt me into backing down. They insisted that suing them would only tear the family apart, as if their actions hadn't already done that. Each time I spoke with them, it became clearer to me that they didn't care about the legal implications. They were only worried about how this would affect Ava's wedding. Meanwhile, Ava sent me more messages. At first, she tried to play the victim, accusing me of ruining her life. But when that didn't work, her tone shifted. She started to apologize, claiming she hadn't known anything about the loan and that she never would have let our parents involve me if she had. "I don't want to fight with you, Ethan," she wrote. "This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and now everything's falling apart. Please don't make it worse." For a brief moment, I considered the possibility that maybe she really hadn't known. Maybe she wasn't as complicit as I had assumed. But then I thought about how well she had manipulated our parents over the years, how easily she could get them to bend to her will. Could she really be that innocent? I didn't trust her. Not fully. Still, I didn't want to carry the weight of this guilt forever. So, I responded with a mix of honesty and diplomacy. "I never intended to ruin your wedding, Ava, but you have to understand how betrayed I feel. Mom and Dad forged my signature without a second thought, and that's not something I can just ignore. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle, but this isn't just about your wedding. It's about something much bigger." I waited for her response, but it didn't come right away. In the meantime, I went ahead with my lawsuit. I wasn't going to let my parents get away with fraud, even if they were family. 2 days later, Ava called me. I hadn't expected to hear from her directly, but I answered anyway. "Ethan, I talked to Josh. He doesn't want to marry me anymore." Her voice cracked, and for the first time I heard genuine emotion in her words. Fear, maybe even sadness. "He thinks I'm like Mom and Dad. He doesn't trust me anymore." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt bad for her, but another part of me couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. She had lived her whole life getting everything handed to her, and now, for the first time, she was facing real consequences. "Ava, I didn't want this," I said quietly, "but I had to protect myself. Mom and Dad put me in a terrible position, and I had no choice." "I know," she whispered. I never thought it would come to this. I never thought they'd do something like that." I sighed. Neither did I. We hung up shortly after that. For the first time in years, I felt like we had reached some kind of understanding, even if it was a fragile one. Over the next few weeks, things spiraled further. Ava's engagement officially ended. She and Josh broke it off, and from what I heard, she was devastated. My parents tried to keep the details quiet, but word spread through the family like wildfire. It wasn't long before extended relatives started reaching out to me, wanting to know what had happened. I kept my explanations brief. There was a loan. Things got messy. Now I'm suing. That was all they needed to know. As for my parents, they were furious. They blamed me for everything. Ava's breakup, the tension in the family, their financial struggles. In their eyes, I was the villain. But I didn't care anymore. I had wasted enough time trying to win their approval, and I wasn't about to let them manipulate me again. The lawsuit was moving forward, and I was ready to see it through. But part of me couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. My family was fractured beyond repair, and even though I knew it wasn't entirely my fault, it still hurt. The golden child had finally fallen, and the black sheep was done playing by the rules. In the days following Ava's call, things got even more chaotic. My parents went from desperate phone calls to flat-out blaming me for everything that had gone wrong. They weren't just angry, they were seething with resentment. And I knew there was no coming back from this. The thing that hurt most wasn't the anger, it was the betrayal. For so many years I had tried to keep the peace, to hold things together despite everything they had done. I had convinced myself that at the end of the day, they were still my family. But now, seeing how far they had gone, how little they cared about me and my future, I couldn't deny the truth any longer. They never saw me as their son, at least not in the way they saw Ava. To them, I was a backup plan, someone to be used when needed and discarded when I wasn't convenient. That realization cut deeper than I ever expected. Despite everything, though, I stayed strong in my decision to go forward with the lawsuit. My lawyer had started the process, and soon my parents would have to face the legal consequences of what they'd done. I tried not to think too much about the fallout, what it would mean for the rest of the family, how things would change once the truth was fully out there. But deep down, I knew nothing would be the same. About a week after Ava and Josh's breakup became public knowledge, my phone rang again. This time it was my father. "Ethan," he began, his voice more strained than I'd ever heard it. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." I wasn't in the mood for another guilt trip. "I think everything that needed to be said has already been said." "No, listen to me." He sounded desperate, and for the first time, there was a hint of fear in his voice. "Ava's engagement is over, and she's a wreck. Your mother's barely holding it together. The family is falling apart because of this. Can't we just work something out without dragging this through the courts?" I paused, weighing my response. Part of me wanted to cut him off right there to hang up and move on. But another part of me, one that still held on to some sliver of hope for reconciliation, kept me on the line. "And what do you propose?" I asked, my tone cold but controlled. He hesitated, and I could tell he hadn't thought it through. "I don't know. Maybe we can figure out a way to settle this quietly. You can still get what you're owed, and we can avoid all the legal mess. I can't see this go any further. It's killing your mother." There it was, the emotional manipulation I had come to expect. It always circled back to how things were affecting them, never about how they had wronged me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Dad, do you even understand what you did? You committed fraud in my name. You forged my signature. This isn't just some minor family squabble we can sweep under the rug." "We made a mistake," he shot back, his voice rising. "But we're your parents. Families don't turn on each other like this. Ava didn't know, and your mother, she's always been emotional. But you've always been the rational one. Don't you see what this is doing to us?" The frustration in his voice was palpable, but it was his choice of words that stuck with me. I had always been the rational one, the one who could be manipulated into giving in because I wasn't the emotional one. They knew they could push Ava around with material things, and they thought they could control me with guilt. I was done with that. "I see exactly what this is doing, Dad. It's showing me that you never really cared about me as much as you do about Ava. You used me, and now you want me to feel guilty for standing up for myself." "That's not true, Ethan," he said, but his voice faltered. "It is. You've made it clear where your priorities lie. You and Mom can't seem to accept that I'm not going to be your scapegoat anymore. This is on you. You should have thought about the consequences before you forged my name." There was a long pause, and I could almost hear him grappling with the reality of what I was saying. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. "So that's it, then? You're going to take us to court?" "I don't see any other option," I replied, my voice steady. "You left me no choice." He muttered something under his breath, something I didn't catch, and then the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I had drawn my line in the sand, but it didn't feel as satisfying as I had hoped. The lawsuit moved forward, and my lawyer assured me that the case was airtight. My parents were in deep trouble, and there wasn't much they could do to wiggle out of it. But even as I prepared for the legal battle ahead, I couldn't shake the weight of everything that had happened. Ava, for her part, had gone radio silent. After our last exchange, where she admitted that she knew about the loan and had gone along with it to keep her wedding plans intact, she hadn't reached out to me again. I wasn't sure if she was ashamed, angry, or both, but I didn't have the energy to dwell on it. She had made her choices, and so had I. But one thing still bothered me: Josh. I had never intended for their engagement to fall apart the way it did, and while I didn't regret telling him the truth, I couldn't help but wonder if I had acted too rashly. Maybe if I had confronted Ava first, things could have been different. Maybe if I had given her a chance to come clean, none of this would have happened. That thought lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at me even as I told myself that I had done the right thing. Then, one afternoon, out of nowhere, I got an email from Ava. It was short and to the point, but it carried a weight that caught me off guard. "Ethan, I don't know if I can forgive you for what you did, but I know I can't blame you entirely either. I should have known better. I should have stopped Mom and Dad before it got this far. I let things get out of hand because I didn't want to face the truth, and now everything's ruined. Josh is gone. My wedding is off, and I don't even know if I can look at our parents the same way anymore. Maybe you were right all along." I read the email a few times, unsure how to respond. It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever gotten from Ava, but it didn't feel like enough. Not after everything that had happened. Not after the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. But at the same time, I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. Ava had been a pawn in our parents' game just as much as I had. And while she had benefited from their favoritism, she was still their victim in a way, caught up in a toxic dynamic that had shaped her entire life. I thought about it for a long time before replying, "Ava, I don't know if we'll ever be able to fix things between us, but I appreciate your honesty. I'm sorry things ended up like this, but I had to protect myself. Maybe someday we can talk about it, but right now, I need space." I hit send and closed my laptop, feeling an odd sense of closure. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was something. As the days turned into weeks, the legal process continued. My parents were scrambling to avoid the worst of it, and my lawyer kept me updated on their attempts to negotiate. Part of me wanted to see them held fully accountable, to face the full consequences of their actions. But another part of me, the part that still saw them as my parents, wanted to find a way out that wouldn't completely destroy what little was left of our relationship. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not without some kind of justice. The court date was approaching, and my parents, under immense pressure, had finally proposed an out-of-court settlement. My lawyer and I went over their offer, an amount that would cover the damages from the loan fraud and a little extra as compensation for the emotional turmoil. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make them realize they couldn't just walk all over me anymore. We were still negotiating the exact terms, but it felt like the end of a long, bitter chapter. My parents wanted to keep things quiet, and while part of me wanted to see them fully exposed for what they had done, I was also tired of the drama, the constant feeling of betrayal, and the emotional weight of it all. Settling seemed like the best option, not for them, but for me. I needed to move on. But even as the legal process was winding down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something unfinished. Ava was still out there, angry, lost, and cut off from both me and our parents. After our last exchange, I hadn't heard anything from her, but I knew she was struggling. Josh had left her, and from what I'd heard, she was planning to leave town, to get away from everything. Part of me felt guilty. Even though she had been complicit in some of our parents' schemes, I knew she hadn't fully grasped the consequences until it was too late. She had always been the favorite, sheltered and spoiled, but now, for the first time, she was facing the fallout of our parents' actions in a real, personal way. A few days before the settlement was finalized, I got a call from my cousin, who still kept in touch with Ava. She told me that Ava had left for Colorado just as I had suspected. She had packed up her things and left without much of a goodbye. Apparently, she needed to get away from the family, from the mess, and try to start over somewhere new. "She's not doing well, Ethan," my cousin said softly. "I think she's really struggling with everything. Maybe you should reach out, Try to fix things before it's too late." I sat there, phone in hand, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that despite everything, we were still siblings. But the other part, the part that had spent years being sidelined, manipulated, and betrayed, felt like it was time to let go. Ava had made her choices, and so had I. Maybe some things just couldn't be fixed. I don't know, I finally replied. I'm not sure if there's anything left to fix. I get it, my cousin said, but just think about it. She's all alone out there. In the end, I decided not to reach out to Ava. Not yet, at least. I needed more time to process everything that had happened. The weight of years of resentment and bitterness wasn't something that could be shaken off overnight, and I wasn't ready to let go of all the hurt. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. The day of the settlement finally arrived. I sat in the conference room with my lawyer as we went over the final details. My parents had agreed to the terms, and while they weren't there in person, their lawyer was present to finalize everything. It felt surreal, like the end of something I had never imagined would happen. A complete severing of ties with the people who had raised me, the people I had once called family. After the paperwork was signed, my lawyer leaned over and gave me a reassuring nod. "It's done," he said quietly. "You don't have to deal with them anymore." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was over. But the emptiness that followed was heavier than I expected. As I walked out of the building, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The lies, the betrayal, the years of feeling like I didn't matter. It was all behind me now, but it had left scars that I wasn't sure would ever fully heal. In the weeks that followed, I tried to move on with my life. The settlement money gave me a chance to focus on my own future, to finally start the business I had been dreaming about for years. But as much as I tried to look forward, there was always a part of me that kept looking back. One evening, after a long day of planning for the business, I sat down and opened my email. I hadn't heard from Ava since her last message, and part of me wondered if she had already forgotten about me. But there, in my inbox, was a new email from her. "Ethan, I know things will never be the same between us, and I don't expect you to forgive me for what happened. I can't even forgive myself, but I just want you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how our parents treated you, and I see now how wrong it was. I'm not asking for us to go back to the way things were, but I hope someday we can find a way to be in each other's lives again. I don't want to lose my brother completely." I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. It was the apology I had been waiting for, but it didn't bring the closure I thought it would. Instead, it left me feeling conflicted, torn between the anger I still carried and the part of me that wanted to believe in the possibility of healing. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat there thinking about everything we had been through. Ava had made mistakes, just like I had, but she was also a product of the same toxic family dynamic that had hurt me. Maybe, in some twisted way, we had both been victims of our parents' favoritism, both molded by their flawed love. A few weeks later, as I was getting ready to launch my business, I received one final update from my lawyer. The settlement money had been transferred, and the case was officially closed. It was over. Truly over this time. I looked around at the office space I had rented, the future I was building for myself. It was the fresh start I had always wanted, free from the baggage of my past. But as I sat down at my desk, I realized something. Even with the money, even with the new opportunities, I wasn't as free as I had hoped. The wounds from my family were still there, and they would take time to heal. Maybe they never would, but at least now I had control over my own life, my own choices. Later that night, I finally replied to Ava's email. "Ava, I appreciate your apology. I think we both have a lot to work through, and I'm not sure how long it will take, but maybe one day we can find a way forward. For now, I need some space. But I don't want to shut the door completely. Take care of yourself." And that was it. No grand resolution. No perfect ending. Just two siblings, both damaged in their own way, trying to figure out how to move forward after a lifetime of hurt. I wasn't sure what the future would hold for me and Ava, or for my relationship with the rest of the family. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own destiny. and that was enough.